Milton Friedman was an extremely important figure in late 20th century economics, perhaps the dominant figure, because he had a plan. He was a guy with a plan, and the plan was to undermine key foundations of Keynesianism one by one. The theory of consumption, to undermine the understanding of the interest rate, to undermine the understanding of employment theory, of inflation theory, and so on, in order to place something else that was, in a sense, also Keynesian, but something else instead. And ideological, economically, at the level of economic theory, it was a failure. Nothing of what he proposed worked. But ideologically, it was extremely powerful and extremely important, and it became the roots of the economics that we study today at university, for example, and that is implemented today at the level of government policy. So, an incredibly important figure, but also a figure that was looking for ways of controlling a society that was threatening to run out of control, controlling a working class that was running out of control under the conditions of the kind of Keynesian consensus. And they found the tools. And what I think is very, very significant in the last 20 years is the way in which inflation control, which was Friedman's obsession, inflation control became an absolutely key macroeconomic policy tool. And it is apparently depersonalized. It's nothing against anybody. You just have to control inflation because it's good for everybody. But the way you deploy economic policy tools to control inflation, it has a very clear social content. And the social content is to reinforce the domination of capital through the domination of financial markets, the kind of hegemony of financial markets in practice, not just at the level of ideology, and then reinforcing a situation of social subordination. I think you're absolutely right to draw this connection because it is very, very important. Well, the limitation is totally political. It's a political thing. Can you do that? And I think, unfortunately, at the moment, we can't. If we could, then it would be in a very different situation. But at the moment, we get the cost of the sort of malfunctioning of capitalism. And it is noticeable that for the first time in a very, very long time, nobody has blamed the left for the crisis, which they couldn't because the left has been so weak. We start from a position of tremendous weakness to try and confront the impact of the crisis. And it is also noticeable that at the moment or until now, social movements, left social movements, have not emerged strongly in the context of the crisis. So they mess it up in a gigantic scale. And the reaction has been muted. But it is muted because it is difficult to organize in a situation of crisis when people are afraid, they are unemployed, they're having very substantial difficulties at the level of the household, and so on. But we're not in a position, politically, ideologically, in terms of organization, almost anywhere in the world, to even consider seriously a platform of radical transformation. I wish we were. We are not. If we were, then we could absolutely, at the level of material production, we have more than enough capacity to satisfy basic needs globally. We can do that. There's no need, there's no reason why people starve in different parts of the world today. The world produces more than enough food for everybody, produces more than enough of any basic good you can think of for everybody. So whenever you have a situation of want, material want, you can look at it and you can very confidently say, this has been created by a particular form of organization. It's not that we haven't got capacity, we have to grow more or anything. Growing more is not going to resolve that. But again, it's a matter of politics and of organization. I completely agree with you on that. I think there's a very worrying trend towards authoritarianism in what used to be called mature democracies. That is extremely worrying, and it happens across kind of, governments and kind of orientations of the ruling parties. The United Kingdom is the case that I kind of know more closely, but I think it applies across the board. The state in these countries is extremely powerful. I come from Brazil, and when I was growing up there was a military dictatorship. There's absolutely no comparison, the kind of levels of state control that you find in a mature democracy, in inverted commas, and what we had at that time back in Brazil. Because these guys were openly brutal, but they were also ignorant, and they didn't know most of the time what was going on. States in the rich countries today have a degree of awareness and control and access to data that was beyond the dreams of the kind of poor dictators we had to deal with at that time. That makes it extremely difficult to organize social movements or to be an activist in a rich country today. This tendency to identify, control, pigeonhole people makes it very, very hard. And democracy, kind of political democracy, gives it a veneer of legitimacy that again makes it doubly complicated to act and to promote a platform that challenges what exists today. So in that bigger context, I think the neocons were a bubble, a localized American bubble. But as they do reflect this kind of trend towards a more authoritarian form of capitalism, which worries me in the context of the crisis itself. Now, to look back at the challenges to neoliberalism that I mentioned before, the whole range of challenges at the level of economics, ideology, politics, social reproduction, and so on. One way to resolve all of them at the same time is to move towards a much more authoritarian kind of capitalism. You don't want to go back to social democracy. You don't want to go back to social integration in the way that happened in the 1960s, 1950s, 60s, 70s. From the point of view of the neoliberal elite, you don't want to be Sweden or Germany in the 1970s. You don't want that. What is the other alternative? How are you going to maintain social discipline without distribution? Without integration of people into good, decent jobs? You're going to have to resort to more authoritarian means. So I think this is a very strong, there's going to be a very strong trend towards that kind of modality of organization of capitalism in the next few years, which is going to make life much more difficult for the left. Potentially it could make life very, very unpleasant for all of us. How this is going to end, we have no idea, and this is evidently a political problem. If we can collect forces enough to resist, we would be in a much, well, it would be, we could abort that. Can we do that? I'm not sure. Now, the Obama, I was very impressed. I hadn't been to the United States for several years, and then I went last April, and I was very impressed. I went just to Washington, D.C. and to New York. I was very impressed by what I saw, the kind of enthusiasm and hope in Obama. Very, very strong, very striking. And what I thought at the time was that it would be a shame. A disappointment would be a shame, would be a real shame to all those people, poor people, humble people that had seen some hope in the political system. But what has been achieved so far is very little, and the trend is not good. So I think it's more likely that Obama will fall into the kind of Clintonian mode of kind of managing capitalism in a perverse way at many levels, but with a populist, kind of populist veneer that makes it pleasant. It's pleasant to have Social Security withdrawn because the guy is so nice. He looks so good. And that makes it much easier. I think it's a much more intelligent strategy for capitalism than the Bush, the second kind of strategy. But it will be, it depends a lot on what kinds of modalities of resistance will be in place. And there's still a lot to be played for, I think, in terms of the Obama administration. I think we're moving towards transnationalization. I don't think we are there yet. There's a school of thought that argues that there is already a transnational capitalist class, or a transatlantic capitalist class at least. I don't think we are there. But the level of integration at all tiers of the organization of capital is already very, very substantial. So I don't see the scope for the development of structural rivalries, for example, between the North American bloc and the European bloc. I don't see that happening. I think the integration at the level of the economy, culture, military level, etc., these are too strong already.